it's interesting that when you mention it, it's kind of describing the basic structure of The Godfather Part Two, which is a structure I have always thought failed in more ways than one. I've always thought that the past structure has always undermined the better present structure of The Godfather Part Two, which would have been, if it was streamlined, would have been a better film.
Well, there was no reason for the past. I've said this, but I just recently rewatched the first two Godfathers. I'm not bothering with the third one, but there's just no reason for it. There's nothing that of value that comes from that. And anyone who and when I read these critics who say, "Well, The Godfather 2 may have been better than Godfather 1," it's like, what the fuck films are you watching? It's clearly an inferior film. Not that Godfather 2 is a bad film, but it's just a good, solid film.
I would agree with that for the most part. I mean, there are some great moments in it,
Yeah.
but only from the present time version. The past recollections are just wasted for the most part. The only thing you can call them is like the visuals of it and the music, which are not really uh, granted to Coppola. But that's how it sounds to me from how you're describing it. It seems like you're going to take it in different avenues.
Well, you have
Than
to do things. You
something
can't
like that.
repeat yourself. This sci-fi book that I'm doing is going to be the most complex of this heroic trilogy. The Western was the least complex. It's set in the 1850s. The spy book in the 20th and 21st centuries is more complex, and because life and characterization gets more complex, by necessity, the future set book should be more complex. And that doesn't necessarily, it may only be about the same length, 300,000 or so words, as the spy book, but it's going to be more condensed. And I can tell already that it's going to contain my best writing. My writing keeps getting better and better. And that's one of the things that makes me feel, gives me, it's
But
something
you're
that,
not claiming that because culture complexes throughout time, that if you went to Mayan culture or, Genghis Khan and his horde, that you wouldn't be able to make something that's just as complex in characterization and ideas as something
well,
set in
well, I'm
contemporary
going to
time.
be doing Khan books, but it's going to have to be complex in a different way. For example, just the linguistic exchanges between people cannot be as complex because the ideas
No,
were not as complex 1,000 years ago when Genghis Khan and the Mongols were ruling. They're not going to be having the deeper philosophical conversations. So I'm going to have to find more poetic ways to get them to converse. If you look at the ancient Chinese poets of the mid first century A.D., their poetry is more complex than the Greeks and the European poetry of the time, but because they have sort of a modernist eye in the way they look at humanity. But they'll talk about seeing armies off in the distance or whatnot, but they're not talking about these more complex ideas because their societies didn't allow for that. Just as in 1,000 years, people will be talking about complex societies, maybe the way humanity maybe takes control of its evolution. If there are other sentient beings and galaxies or civilizations, and they don't eat or conquer us, we may have relationships with sentient creatures that we have no clue about. In the science fiction book, for example, racism and sexism and bigotry against sex or religion or sexuality has gone away, but there are still lingering tensions between what I call the nats, the natural humans who are unenhanced, the bions who would be cyborgs who are part machine and part human, and the Andes or androids who are artificial humans. So there are three levels of humans in this futuristic society, which is a classic trope. And then there are a few other sentient species that humanity has encountered. But pretty much my galaxy is similar to the Foundation Trilogy galaxy in that it's humans that are the dominant species out there that we've conquered. In my book, I think it's something like 8 or 10% of the galaxy, and out of the 2,000 plus worlds we have colonies on, there's only about 7 or 8 sentient species we've met, and none of them are as complex as the humans, except for a couple of ancient cultures that have gone extinct that have moved beyond the physical realms. So you have each book requires doing things in a different way. I you know on a surface level, the writing in Vincetti Brothers and Norwegian the Family looks kind of, excuse me, similar because there are long passages and long scenes and dialogue with the total immersion. But they're fundamentally different books in their approaches, in their outlooks. As I said, uh, Vincetti Brothers is a gritty, dark and white film. If you were to film it, it would have to be in black and white. And I would, anyone who watches this, if in 40 or 50 years they wanted to make a film of the Vincetti Brothers, I would state it has to be in black and white. Otherwise, don't touch my work until it goes in the public domain, and then you can rate me. But a Norwegian in the Family should be in bright Technicolor, and the films that a film of that, or if they did a mini series or a cable series for 7 or 8 years, that has to be in bright 1960s Technicolor. Andy Warhol is born for Technicolor. Truman Capote, Technicolor. You know, it's the 60s.
You mentioned the Vincetti Brothers. That I had recently watched Rocco and his brothers, and we were talking about the editing process. There are whole characters and scenes taken straight from that film and put in Vincetti Brothers, although you alter it slightly. And that was an interesting thing of how you take one thing and you make it better.
Well, yeah,
because Rocco and his brothers is essentially a melodrama.
Yeah.
There are some great dramatic moments, but it is just a soap opera written to the highest levels possible. In Vincetti, it's a straight drama.
The hotel humiliation scene, I use that, but it has a deeper significance. Also, the whole thing with the two brothers and the girl and the rape of Cindy McGee. Those are the two main threads I took from Rocco and his brothers.
There's also the characters themselves. Like the Aldo character is essentially the Alain Delon character too, in that it shows his weakness. He's a weak-willed character, and the Gino character is certainly a conduit. I can't remember the actor's name, but the raper is essentially Gino. Although both Gino and Aldo have more complex traits, and it's as if you took a lot.
They're
of the
more complex and they're worse people.
The melodrama.
Yeah, and they're worse people. Melodrama has its place, and there are some melodramatic moments I have scattered throughout my fiction, but it's melodrama used for the specific purpose to illuminate something deeper.